Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I'm honored to have my guest. I'm going to let her introduce herself. So, why don't you tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Ooh, on the spot. All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Caroline J. Sumlin. I'm honored to be here on the Liberation Lab podcast. Thank you so much for having me. I'm an author slash writer slash content creator slash homeschool mom slash coffee obsessed person because I just feel like
Oh,
it's like a third job is just like finding coffee shops and testing them. Like that's just kind of like what brings me little pockets of joy when I'm losing my mind. So it's in there. Slash certified rule breaker, because I consider myself a disruptor in this world. And let's see, that's what I do. Why do I do it? That's such a loaded question, but essentially because in my search for freedom
mm,
and finally loving myself and finding myself worthy, I
mhm,
realized that our entire world, but specifically our society here in America slash Western society, did not have freedom and was also literally screaming to find themselves worthy. I used to think it was a me problem, and I realized it is a societal problem. And when I realized that, that's what drove the work that I do. That's what drives the work that I do every single day because
mm.
we are humans and we are so worthy. It's about time that we stick it to society that is trying to tell us otherwise.
The idea of being worthy, the idea of self efficacy.
hmm
Um, I think about it on multiple fronts. One, I think about it personally as a recovering perfectionist, as a recovering people pleaser.
hmm
I think about it as, the educators that I have the honor of serving alongside, them feeling like this year's had its ups and downs and I don't know if I can do this, or and then, that whole aspect of just being an educator and self-efficacy. I think
Yes.
about it in roles of just being a husband, being a wife, a mother, a father. The idea of worthiness, I think, permeates so much of everything that we do.
hmm
And so my question then is, what are some of the reasons that, whether it be from your personal experience, work with others, what are some of the reasons you think people struggle so much with feeling like they're worthy?
Because society, modern day society, which is built, you know, when I consider modern day society, I consider present day, and then
Mhm,
but take that back to essentially the formation of how we got to where we are today as far as present day is concerned. So kind of like anywhere between, I would say, like the Enlightenment era to
mhm,
the beginning of colonization to
mhm,
the formation of what we live in today, right? um I believe that the way that modern society was built on creating a hierarchy of humanity is one of the main roots
mhm,
for why we feel that we are unworthy. However, you take it a little bit deeper and ask yourself, well, why did we as humans create such a world? Because we
mhm,
did this to ourselves as
mhm.
humans. Why,
Right.
as humans, where did we go wrong in that? Why have we always struggled with seeing each other as worthy, which is really rooted in seeing ourselves as worthy,
Mhm,
right? Um, and if you're someone of faith, then you can trace that through faith, which I am, but I don't claim to be a theologian, so I don't go super deep into that. But
mhm,
that there's a root there as well. But
mhm,
if you really look at how, as humans, we're constantly craving power and control, right? Where does that come from? And it comes from many different things, but a lot of that comes from feeling like in order to feel important, in order to feel like we are something, we have to have power and control and domineer over somebody else to make
mhm.
ourselves feel better, to make ourselves feel powerful. When in reality, all that does is just make nobody feel, it makes us all feel worse. And you can trace through history how people groups have done this to ourselves. thus creating cultures where different cultures throughout the world, and in some way, shape, or form, this does exist. I'm not saying that in Western society where we are like exclusive to behaving this way. It's just in Western society, white supremacy has been the tool that has been used
Yeah.
in most recent times, and that's where we are today. So that's when I talk about the racial hierarchy and colonization, I'm talking about that just happens to be the most latest recent tool that has been used in our society that has created our culture, right? So it starts there. Those are those deep-seated roots
Hmm.
that thus grew into this huge rotten tree, but it still
Hmm.
grows. You know what I'm saying? It's still like has life in it, but it's like rotting. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing, almost like an uncontrollable weed of some sort.
Yeah.
Um, and so you've got those roots, which are in the power and the control and the greed, and that can be traced through religion, that can be traced through faith, that can be traced through other things. And those planted roots of, okay, most recently colonization and creating a hierarchy based on the supremacy of whiteness and anti-blackness, thus creating a society with different institutions that followed that hierarchy, that now have a world of us essentially chasing our worth by seeing a standard that is constantly unattainable that we try to reach. And it happens in every single way. You name a corner of society, and we're trying to chase a standard there, whether that be in education. We see that all
Hmm.
the time. For the most part, in the beginning of life, we don't question it. We're told this is the way that it is. This is what you have to do to be successful, to be worthy. You've got to get the grades, you got to get the GPA. You have to, if we're talking about education, you have to pass a standardized test. You have to be seen as excellent. You have to be seen as there's meets expectations and exceeds expectations. You really got to
Hmm.
exceed expectations to be seen worthy of something, to be seen as gifted, or to be seen as worthy of being given a shot, or whatever the case may be, right? All of that was built in something. Where did these standards come from? Why did we create those standards? If you trace the history, those standards are rooted directly in racism.
Hmm.
So because of racism, because of white supremacy, it's created all of these now cultural norms that we don't question. We just fall in line when we go to school, and we then end up hating ourselves, thinking we're not enough, and then that's expressed in multiple different ways based on the person. That could be in the recovering perfectionist like you and me. That could be in the student that checks out and says, forget this, I'm not worth anything, I can't do it. That
Hmm.
can be in students that, turn to abusive behavior, self-abusive behaviors. There's so many different things. That's education, but it's in every institution. It's in the beauty, it's in health, it's in corporate, right?
Hmm.
It's everywhere. It's in the entertainment industry. And that's my long-winded answer that has fascinated me so far. This is the conclusion that I came to, and this is why I wrote my book.
So, so since we're here, plug the book. What? Tell us about your book, the title, um, and um, it's kind of been the guide, the signpost, the guidepost, if you will, for our conversation. We're kind of framing it around this work that is coming out, that I have pre-ordered. So I'm very excited to get my hands on my copy. But tell people about your book, your title, and things like that.
Well, I'm so grateful that you've pre-ordered. The title of my book is "We'll All Be Free: How a Culture of White Supremacy Devalues Us, and How We Can Reclaim Our True Worth." And in that book, I use historic evidence and facts, not in like a super boring textbook kind of way, but in a super personable, we're having coffee kind of way, to show us how, due to the way that society has been built, this is why we have the culture that we have, and then what to do about it, how to break free from that
Yeah.
personally, and how to begin breaking free from that as a society. Um, and because especially, and I actually start the book in a certain way where I actually begin talking about our individual trauma, because we all have some sort of trauma in our lives, and a lot of times we like to stop there and think, okay, well, what happened to me? This is why I don't feel like I'm worthy. If you would have asked that question to most other people about why do people not feel like they're worthy, they'd be like, well, when I was little, someone told me I was dumb. When I was little, someone did this, da 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 da, right? Or this, my parents divorced, or someone abused me, or I was adopted. That's me, that's my story. um, which we have in common.
Hmm.
um, so but we stop there. We stop with the individual and think, oh, that thing happened to me, so I don't feel like I'm worthy, so I have to try to figure out how to undo that thing in myself. But
Establish. Yeah.
that's actually not getting us very far. Because let's take it. I'm realizing when we put band-aids on things, that's what we do as humans, as a society. We like to put a band-aid on it,
Yep.
instead of actually figure out how to heal the wound and where did the wound come from in the first place.
Yeah.
It's like when you get a chronic illness. Like I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's 2 years ago, and I could just be like, all right, well, that happened to me. I can just take some supplements or take some medication and just figure out how to move forward. Or I can figure out, where did that come from? Why did my body begin attacking itself in this way?
Hmm.
Right? It's the
Hmm.
same thing here. So when you get to your individual wounds and traumas, you can actually more than likely trace those back to even white supremacy. What is it that has caused marriages to struggle the way that they do? You can trace it back to white supremacy. What is it that is causing so many families, particularly Black and brown families, to be separated and be placed into homes, rather than families being supported to raise the children they gave birth to? You can trace it back to white supremacy, right? Patriarchy, misogyny, all of those other systems of oppression.
Hmm.
You can,
Hmm.
in our society, I understand that a lot of these have existed before white supremacy, but in our society, they're traced back to white supremacy because that's how they've been used in our society,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I actually do a lot of personal connecting in the book and help people understand how their individual traumas and wounds are connected to white supremacy, and then how white supremacy culture essentially adds salt to that, right? So you
Hmm.
have your maybe you're someone that struggled with your body image, but you think it's just because that your mom talked down to you about your body and was constantly telling you that you needed to watch your weight and watch your calories. Okay, well, where did she get that from? Well, you trace back the roots of body image and diet culture. You can trace that back to white supremacy and racism, where white women were told that in order to essentially save their race and well represent their race, excuse me, they had to be thin. They had to be thin. They had to be skinny, because to be fat was to look and act like a Black woman who was a mammy, who was illiterate, who was
Hmm.
worthless, right? Was why
Wow.
we fear the Black body. So all of it is connected,
Yeah.
but we don't take it back that far. We just think, well, I have this issue. My mom did this to me, and you stop there. And then you wonder why you actually don't ever get full clarity and why you continue to struggle with this thing for the remainder of your life, because you don't know the truth behind where it came from.
You're establishing a process for healing and for freedom for the folks who are listening, but you are repeating a phrase that some who might be listening might misinterpret.
Mm.
You are saying white supremacy. So I'm going to ask you a question because we've been rocking for a while, so I already know.
Yes.
But when you say white supremacy, do you mean white people?
No. It's like one of those moments when I'm sorry, I'm going to answer the question, but
Please.
I was so because I didn't explain this in my introduction. I'm a former educator. I'm a former public school educator. I educated for 5 years in special education, so I already know the deal. And you know how when you have like a guest presenter in your classroom and you want your students to like learn something, so you
Yeah.
ask like, what you like raise your hand and they're like, Miss Snowden, that was my maiden name.
Yeah.
What's your question? And you're like, tell me. Da, 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 da. One of those really like staged questions so that they teach
Absolutely.
on the moment.
That was it.
That's what you
100%.
did.
100%.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
No, I don't mean white people. Um, White supremacy is, I hate that it is such a controversial thing. I understand that it's a controversial thing because when you when we've been taught about what white supremacy is, we've been taught that it is the white extremism that historically and presently exists. Whether that be the KKK, or in the 90s, the skinheads, and now what we see today with the Proud Boys and whoever the other groups are, because really, are they really worth being named? No. The idiots that, marched on the state capitol on Mother's Day with their, their masks on, whoever they were. That's what you think, right?
Hmm.
And once racism was illegal, quote unquote, um, and it became uncool to be racist, and I put all these things in quotes because no one stopped being racist, they just stopped doing it outwardly because they didn't want to lose their job or something like that.
Hmm.
um, that became such like a hush hush thing, and it became, you have to present yourself as being good, friendly white people because you never want to seem like you don't like those coloreds. um, so that's why when we talk about white supremacy now, white people feel like they're being attacked. But white supremacy is the term that we use to define how specifically our society was built. Because if you look at the structures of our society, and when I say structures, I mean everything from the Constitution and Declaration of Independence to individual institutions, the institution of chattel slavery, the institution of the Black Codes, the institution of Jim Crow, the institution of education, the institution of health, the institution of media, any institution, housing, the institution, the economic institution. These are all institutions, business institutions, the banking institutions, you name an institution. And you
Right.
look historically as to how those institutions were built. They were built strategically to ensure that yes, in this case, white people were at the top of the social ladder.
Hmm.
Always. They
Hmm.
had more, they it was designed to ensure that white people had more money, more opportunity, and could, even once illegal, could still separate themselves in a de facto sort of way from Black and brown people.
Right.
That is white supremacy. There is no denying the existence of this, because you can look in the history of any institution and you can see evidence of laws and homeowners associations that wouldn't allow Black people to move in. And I mean, and these are some of the more broad things we talk about, like redlining. But you can even look in. I would encourage you to look into, if you work for a corporation that happens to have been around for quite some time, look into the history of their bylaws and look into their hiring practices prior to a certain date. And even be surprised at and how recent those things probably have even changed, or maybe haven't even changed.
Yeah.
So yes, that is white supremacy. That's why we say it's a systemic thing. Does that mean that all white people are socioeconomically at more advantage than Black people individually? No. Or people of color? Absolutely not. But as a whole, do we see that exist? Yes. And it's not even just socioeconomic. Look at any sort of statistic
Yep.
between the racial groups, and you will see strong disparities, with most likely the Black people, specifically us, um, being at the bottom of that. When you look at any sort of health rate, when you look at any sort of death rate, when you look at suicide rates, mental health rates, education, all of the, why do those gaps exist? They did not just get there because, for whatever reason, you all have convinced yourselves that Black people are inferior, you know?
Absolutely.
So yes, that is white supremacy. But no, it does not mean all white people, all white people, all white people. That's not what we're saying. White supremacy culture is the culture that we live in. Okay, it's our dominant standard American culture. Let's be
Right.
real. Let's call it what it is. That was created as a result of the institutions and structures and economic policies and everything else that were put in place, because they were put in place on a foundation of white supremacy. So you don't get a culture without those things. Like, any culture has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just happen by accident, right? So that's
Hmm.
why we have a culture of white supremacy. And while many would like to sugarcoat it and just call it dominant culture and
Hmm.
take the white out of it, that's still erasing history. That still does not get us to the root of what's going on. It still ignores the truth. And we
Yeah.
get nowhere when we ignore the truth.
As you were talking, the thing that was popping up in my mind was how repeatedly folks like MLK would tell America that you have to expose the blister, the diseased part of American society, expose it to the sun so it could be exposed and healed so that we can move forward. He would consistently remind people like James Baldwin, you see him in the back, Uncle Jimmy, they would, they continuously put America on notice. Like you need to figure out why you're doing these things.
Right.
Right? Why did you create? Like I love when James Baldwin is like, the thing that white Americans have to do is figure out why they created the nigger.
Hmm.
Because I'm not him.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's it. Like,
Mm.
and so to juxtapose that now, because now we're still in these yet to be United States with folks like Ron DeSantis, who was signing law after law to ban DEI from institutions to stop. I mean, his war on Disney that he's failing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
all of these things, there seems to be a very strategic push for us to hide, minimize, um, and control alt delete our way out of seeing our history. As someone who has done extensive work to reveal history through your book, what what do you think the dangers are of that? Like, where do you think that we as a society will be impacted by these efforts if made successful? Where do you think they'll hit us most, if that makes sense?
Oh my goodness. It's I'm gathering myself for this answer because I was talking on my Instagram stories today actually
Hmm.
about Ron DeSantis and his successful passing of the banning of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the ripple effect, and not just that, I mean, of like you said, of everything that's going on. And I've written this before. We are in the midst of one of the biggest white supremacist backlashes in our history.
Yes.
And that is the cycle. Okay, history repeats itself. If you look at every single time any marginalized body has, and but I would say most specifically, or or more often, I'll say, Black people, because we know this is rooted in anti-Blackness. But
Hmm.
anytime the Black body has either advanced or exposed, we have the backlash of white supremacy. And because every other system of oppression is rooted in white supremacy and stems from white supremacy, so that be misogyny, that be sexism, that be heterosexism or homophobia, that be transphobia, all those things are rooted in anti-Blackness. Anytime, same thing, there is going to be advancement and success and acceptance and welcoming of another version of humanity that is just as beautiful as what we've been told is the only beautiful version of humanity. There's going to be a backlash. This is nothing new. So you
Yeah.
just look through history. You'll see the cycles of backlash. You'll see when our enslaved ancestors were free. You saw the backlash, and how Reconstruction barely lasted because of white supremacists. So
Yeah.
um, this is nothing new. That said, this is one of the most dangerous ones, I feel, and it's sometimes I feel like it's hard to say that because I'm like, when you look at history, look how bad that was. Like, oh, it can't get worse than that. But it's
Yeah.
it's it's just as dangerous. It's just different because it's modern, so to speak. Um, but I unfortunately feel like we are going to continue to take several steps backwards before we begin moving forward again.
Hmm.
Um, and that deeply saddens me. Like, I'm filled with emotion speaking about this right now, which is why I'm like gathering myself as I talk about it, because I'm I don't want to admit that I'm afraid, because I speak so much about being hopeful, and my book is written in the premise of there still being hope, and how to find that, and how to and what we can do to
Hmm.
to actually make a difference where we are. But at the same time, I am human and I am afraid. I'm afraid for the expansion of this, and how specifically, if you want to talk specifics, bringing it back to the ban of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the state of Florida, and that potentially getting expanded elsewhere, which we know is coming. That takes away the safe spaces for all marginalized bodies that we wouldn't have to create the safe spaces in the first place if you didn't do this to us,
Yeah.
right? We wouldn't need the safe spaces, but what we do. We can't erase what happened. Trying to erase what happened from the classroom and from talking about it doesn't actually erase the fact that it happened.
Right.
Doesn't erase the fact that we need safe spaces as marginalized people, because existing in society as a whole is not a safe space for us.
Yeah.
And you're taking those safe spaces away
Yes.
because you are afraid and you want power and control. I'm gutted by all of this. And not just that, of course. It's everything. It's the banning of books. It's the anti-trans laws. It's everything. It guts me
Yeah.
because we know who's not going to be affected by
That
this,
part. Yeah.
you know. But and we know who will be deeply affected by this. But I also say, because and one of the biggest things I want to make sure that everyone understands from my work is that white supremacy does affect us all. So I should actually take that back. They will be affected. They won't know they won't be affected like we are. My thing is that white supremacy does affect everybody, because look at how mentally unwell these people are. Like, that's not, you can't tell me you're not being affected by white supremacy when you look at the behaviors and the attitudes and the character of the people that are doing this. That's being affected negatively by this. You just don't see it. Okay,
Yeah.
you don't see it. You're a broken human. You know what I'm saying? We're all
Yeah.
broken by this. We're all affected by this.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, and that's why I say in the beginning of my book, I say this book is written for everybody. Is written for the white person, the black person, the gay person, the trans person. It's written for everybody because we are all equal, not equally, excuse me. We are all unequally affected by white supremacy, but we are all affected by it. Yes, marginalized bodies will always be affected the most, but it's not. White supremacy is not a problem for marginalized people that white people just need to sit back and say, "Man, that sucks."
Right.
No, we are
Right.
all negatively impacted by white supremacy.
The aspects of a white supremacy culture that keep it thriving, in my view, some of it is that a lack of shifting from mere sympathy to empathy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sad for you to go through that
Mm-hmm.
versus let let tell me what it's like to put on and walk in your shoes, and even though it doesn't fit my narrative, let me accept what you're telling me because you have to live there. Like, and then I make your problem my problem because I'm hearing you. Like,
Yes.
those those things are, I'm going to say they seem like they are on life support in recent memory.
Yeah.
And so I think about it this way too. When you remove knowledge from folks or the opportunity to learn, you put people um, in a state of ignorance that will be rewarded.
Yes.
So you could essentially go through now a history class in these states that are banning DEI, banning all these different things, banning CRT, but have no idea what it is. Like,
Hmm.
all of these efforts, you could get an A in that class and then have the mark that you have done it well and still be ignorant of
Mm-hmm.
so much more. So now
Yeah.
we're not only um, saying, hey, these things are removed, but now we're rewarding ignorance. So when people have an ignorance that is rewarded and reinforced, it is that much more, um, it's harder to fight almost. I think about it this way. I remember watching the movie Higher Learning. Have you seen that?
I haven't.
In Higher Learning, uh, Ice Cube, uh, Omar Epps, Tyra Banks, like these are some of the key. Uh, Lawrence Fishburne was a professor. Um,
Why haven't I seen this movie?
you,
That's
you
the question right there.
go back after this
Let me go
moment,
back
write
and
that down.
write that down so I don't, I clearly need some my own education because where was I? Probably being shielded by stuff from my mom. Let's be real. Anyway.
It's and listen, I could see why with what I'm about to tell you. So in this movie, you see there are two sides to this college experience. Um, this one white gentleman, I forget the gentleman's name who plays him. I see him all the time on Fox Sports. He talks sometimes. He's like a star that they bring in and things like that. So he he comes in and he gets rejected by people. He's kind of an outcast, and so he kind of goes to this white terrorist organization, becomes a skinhead. And so he's trying to get to power because he knows what it's like to be, in his view, powerless. He's been excluded, he's not accepted by his own, and so he kind of goes to the extremes to try to get this power.
Hmm.
And through the indoctrination of it all, he takes that power and the ignorance that he got reinforced with, right? So now he's lashing out at people. He's saying things towards like Ice Cube and Omar Epps to the point where he takes an assault rifle, goes up on a roof, and shoots people and basically kills Tyra Banks in the movie.
Hmm.
Sorry, spoiler alert.
I,
Um,
I'm okay with spoilers. It's okay.
okay. And my point in bringing that whole thing up is the character that I'm speaking of had a reinforced ignorance that made him believe that he was justified with every pull of the trigger. And when you see him kind of um, meet his demise and all the things at the end, you see how even in the response of police officers and things like that, it was still coddled and reinforced and all of those things. Now, if we're looking at these things ideologically, it makes so much more sense why certain people are who pass through our world unaffected or seemingly unaffected, because again, what we do is we reward the ignorance of people. We
Hmm.
reward the people who aspire to hoard power in these ways, who look a certain way, who apply these standards. We reinforce it to the point, and the people who have been trying to get unplugged from the matrix, to use that analogy, well, now we're going to remove the opportunity to learn any differently.
Hmm.
So what we've done is accelerated the learning of the dominant culture of white supremacy culture in folks by removing the alternative.
Yes. Yep.
And now I think about that as an educator, as a school leader. I think about that in my schools
Hmm.
and the effect that that has, because I'm going to teach kids the truth, full stop.
Hmm.
But what if when I teach kids the truth and I show them historically how these things have merit, they go out to a world where now to get that college degree, they got to deny the truth that they know.
Whew. Oh my God.
Those are the things I
Hmm.
think of. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Gave me chills. So yes,
I think that there's so much at risk there,
absolutely.
and I wonder for our, educators who are listening, who are one who may be at odds with what's happening, feeling powerless. Like, how do we stop? What they feel like this might be one of those moments where things are spiraling out of their control. They're just trying to make it through to their school day. They got behaviors rampant because there's so much going on. There's so much trauma that is not being met with the methods that need to be, right. There's not counseling enough. There's no mental health services. There's a whole bunch of things wrong with how the system of schooling moves forward, and yet they feel like they're trying to do their best,
Hmm.
and then they look at the news and it seems almost that much more worse.
Hmm.
How does one in that place, because I know you talk about this in your book, how does one in that place kind of steady the ship and still know that they're being productive in terms of their moving forward to that freedom that you speak of in your work? What are some practical things that they can do to kind of steady the ship, if that makes sense?
Mm. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, specifically as an educator, I would examine, how are you perpetuating white supremacy culture within your classroom?
Hmm.
Because, and I know that's a lot. You're already going through a lot. I get it. But at the same time, when you decide to be a disruptor,
Yeah.
that's the freedom. For example, do you have hierarchies in your classroom in ways
Mm,
that students can be, and you could not even realize you're doing it? And this is not to shame, because it's the way we've been taught to do things, right? It's the way we've been
absolutely.
taught. And I get it. There can be schools and principals and administrators who are telling you you have to do these things. But if that were the case in a school that I was working in, excuse me, I would straight up tell my students, I'm being told I have to do this, but this is irrelevant. This is irrelevant.
Mm,
We're because I want to, because I care so much about you and I want to make sure I'm staying your teacher, I'm going to be complicit in this. However, there is no hierarchy in this classroom.
mm,
Okay? How can you reframe grades so that your students can understand that this is not a measure of worth, that not a measure of your intelligence? You know what I'm saying? Um, all those things that we normalize in the systems, how can you be, even if it's something small, be a disruptor in that, and help you and your students realize that the power, because we've talked about power so much, and I've been racking my brain as we've been talking and thinking about this. Is I feel like this is like the next book or something like that, to really help us understand,
okay, now.
like to help us understand the human need for power. And because human needs, I don't like how, in quickly kind of bring church into it and bring it back because I don't want, but
It's all right.
in like church culture, it's very much like, well, just, the power's in Jesus and just leave it there. But we still haven't examined, why as humans do we feel this need for power? And is it
Mm,
that the actual power itself is the issue, or is it the way that we are looking for that power, or how we're defining that power, or whatever that may be,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because you can either, like in the movie that you're describing, feel powerless and then go search for it in this extreme harmful way that clearly is doing nothing, no good for anybody.
Yep.
Or you can discover how much power you have within yourself because of just how worthy you are in your own being of who you are. How can you help your students find that power
Mm,
within themselves that they don't have to search for in any other way, but just by being unapologetically them? What does that look like? And be unapologetically yourself. What does that look like for you and your students?
yeah.
And as I'm a home educator now, and I'm not saying this is easy, but it's something that I have to wrestle with every day. Every day I feel like I don't have power. I'm like, oh my gosh, my house is out of control. I don't have any power. My kids are out of control. They control me. I'm a nobody. I'm just here. Like, who am
Yeah.
I don't exist. Nobody cares about me. I'm alone. Like, believe me, my mind spirals,
Yeah.
right? And that's all because I feel like I have lost my power in those moments. But it's
Yeah.
that I've lost my power, or is that I'm defining power incorrectly, right? And then I need to redefine what is power in, so for my faith, what is Jesus telling me that power is? For your faith, what does that look like for you? Because I
Mm,
am faith inclusive. If you're not a Christian, if you're not anyone of faith, however you connect with your spirit and your soul, what does that look like? What is the healthy definition of power for you, and understanding
yeah.
that you already have it within yourself, you
Mm,
know?
yeah. That power reframe is I think key. And you mentioned grading. I used to be to make it even more practical for folks who may be listening. I used to be the starch, like you don't do it, you get a zero.
Mm-hmm.
That used to be me. And it came from a place of I need my students to be accountable, right? In my
Mm-hmm.
mind, I need them to be accountable to turning work in on time, to meeting deadlines. Why is that important? Because they're going to have to grow up in a world where they have to do X, Y, and Z. And it wasn't until later on that I realized that essentially I was grading for privilege. That if I
Mm.
give them an assignment and I say, please take this home, please do these things, that at that moment, I'm submitting them to the inequities in their world.
Yeah.
That student A could go home and have all the things necessary, have stable Wi-Fi, have a computer or the provided Chromebook that we got from all the COVID money in their house. They could have um, a place to work and space in their house to do that. They could have parents that help them, but I could give it to student B, and student B has to go pick up their younger siblings. Their mom works two shifts because they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to, put things together for the family. And now I'm giving student B that zero because they didn't turn it in on time. And at the end of the day, what is a grade supposed to do? It's supposed to measure what you know,
Right.
not necessarily your privilege in your world, but what do you know? And they should be in a constant state of refinement. They should not be a final determination. You should allow students to grow with the curriculum, with with your teaching. You should
Right.
allow them the opportunity to continue to grow and evolve. But no, I was a starch zero, and a zero was a death sentence because even after they got that zero, it's late. Now, if they turn it back in, I'll give them some partial credit. But you know what that did to their grade? If they had an 87, they were going down to a 56, and they had to do a whole lot to try to come back for that. And it wasn't until much later that I realized the error of my ways. What was I doing there? I was reinforcing a standard that was not made for the students that I taught.
Correct.
And reinforcing that standard, I was saying that this is the most important thing. I don't care what's going on in your life. I don't care what the hand you've been dealt. You turn in things on time. Why? Because I am your teacher and I'm in power. I'm in control here.
Mm-hmm.
I would have never said it that way,
Yeah.
but that's exactly how I ran my classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about grading. Not only that, I think about behavior. I have I stepped into the APC this year, and I'm being honest with you. I've probably been cursed at or cursed out more times than I can count this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people feel like, oh, you're the assistant principal. You have this title. So therefore, you need to walk around in a certain level of authority. You need to walk around with a certain level of power. And kids they need to be fearful of you. Like that's what you need to do. And one, I don't know if you've seen these kids today. They're not They're not they're not worried about your little title. They don't care.
They finally figured
I,
it out. Like these
yeah,
titles don't matter.
they don't matter. Who do you think you are? Right?
Right.
You wake up just like I do. You put on one pant leg at a time just like I do. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
their thing. And
Yes.
so going back to your point, and I want to kick it back to you, when we talk about reframing power, we're ultimately inviting teachers, educators, leaders on what I call a journey to disrupt.
Yeah.
How do we disrupt the things that we are seeing that aren't serving us and aren't serving our students? Here's the problem, though, and this is where I want to kick it to you. To ask somebody to disrupt is asking them to lay something on the line,
Yeah.
even if it's just a moment's comfort. So if I'm an educator who hears you and is like, yeah, I hear you. That makes sense. I need to change that. Or I could do this, but fill in the blank. And I have that in mind. in my mind. What advice could you give me to help navigate beyond that? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does. Man, you and these heavy questions. um, because I feel like actually heavy's not the word. Layered. Layered is the
Yeah.
word. Because that fill in the blank could be so many things. And that's
Yeah.
gonna change the answer. Um, but let's say for example, it's the moment of discomfort.
Yeah.
Right. That's a more simple one to go with because your job's not on the line or something like that. And I
Right.
believe me, I get it, and I'll tackle that as well to the best of my ability. But I mean, I look at it even in my own life, or even with the things that I used to do with my students. When I say my own life, I was saying with my kids, were the things that I even used to do with my students. I had this conversation. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going in my brain went whoop in two different directions. Let me bring it to one place. I had this conversation with my daughter the other day, and we were talking about why I chose to take all of the toys out of our home that have noises and flashes and all that. I did that like a few like when she was 2, when my youngest was a baby. I have two girls, and they're 6 and 4 now. Um, and so my 6-year-old is very inquisitive, and we're having all these questions. She's trying to figure out like, what was life like when I was 2, and I told her, and kind of just fell into this conversation about how I took certain toys away because I was working a different job at the time, working from home, and I wanted to really train her to be able to use her imagination and freely play without falling into the I'm being entertained default that a lot of culture today with the way we treat children is with all of the toys that
Mm.
entertain them, right? We
Yeah.
look at the majority of kids these days, and I'm not saying this to judge, I'm saying that this is what we've been conditioned to, right?
Yep.
All of the toys make noise and do the thinking and do the playing for the child, and therefore if a child's not being constantly entertained, then they're bored, they're overstimulated, so they have a lot harder of a time managing their emotions and things of that nature, thinking clearly, etc. And so we talked about that, and I told her how it would have been easier to just have you watch screens and play on the iPad more often when I was working. It would have been easier. Absolutely. You would have been quiet. I would have been able to get my work done. Boom. I wouldn't have had any issues. Because they were even asking me the other day, I'm very honest with them. And they were like, Mom, why did you have kids if you wanted to work? Because I'm working. And I'm like, I need time to work. And they're like, well, but we're here. And I'm like, that's okay because we're going to do both and we're going to make it work. And I'm going to explain this to you. And I'm very honest with them. And so I explained to them, like, I'm not here for easy because easy is going to allow for short-term comfort but long-term unrest, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I dealt, and believe me, when I took certain toys away and I started to train my 2-year-old how to play independently, mind you, she's 2.5. This was not it wasn't all of a sudden she was like da 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 blocks, this is so cool. What? No, she threw so many fits. She didn't want to be in her room. She didn't want to play a certain way.
Hmm.
She wanted mommy. I had a call. It was not easy. I had to constantly redirect her. Every time she'd come out of her room, I would just redirect and say, nope, it's time for your room time right now. Nope, it's time for room time right now. It was not easy. There were so many days where I didn't get anything done because I was just redirecting to her room. And not in an authoritative way, but just saying it is room time right now so we all can have time to ourselves because this is what's healthy for us. I understand that as an educator, someone who is responsible for children, there
Yeah.
is a certain level of control you need to have. I get that.
Right.
Children are
Right.
not adults. They're not supposed to be. So when we talk about leveling the power field here, we're not talking about letting your children have all the control,
Yeah.
so to speak, because you are still responsible for the culture of your classroom. You're responsible for making sure everyone is safe and doing things in an effective manner. But how are you teaching that, right?
Yeah.
Are you succumbing to those moments to allow for things to be comfortable because it's frustrating right now and because their behavior is expressing that they're not happy? It's okay to be unhappy. I get it. This is really difficult. How can I make this easier for you? Let's work together on this. As an educator, I understand, right, that you need control in a certain level, I guess you could say, of power in your classroom to be able to create the culture that you desire for your students. But like you were saying, right, your power was misguided, right? So in the case of my child, I'm choosing to to do something so uncomfortable that took so much time to be able to create a certain type of culture. I had to undo things that I had done. That's the kind of the point that I'm getting at. I had to
Mm.
undo things that I had done,
Mhm.
undo things that I had allowed into our home to create one type of culture, and then to then undo it and then build another type of culture. These things did not happen overnight. My child now doesn't even remember that this happened. She
Yeah.
knows now our culture in our home. She knows, don't ask mommy for a toy that lights up. Ha! And she'll look at these things at Target, and I'll be like, Avery, she's like, I know, mom. I know we don't get things that light up. I'm just looking at it, but I know that our toys are better. I'm like, okay, great. But in all seriousness, it took years to create that culture,
Mm.
but the outcome has been so worth it because now we, and I'm not saying things are perfect, but my daughter knows how to play for long periods of time and her imagination soars when she
Mm.
plays. It is beautiful. And when people see her play and know how long she plays, they are amazed at what she's able to create and do because all of her toys were specifically curated to create a certain level of creativity in her mind. Right. So
Mhm.
that's obviously not the same exact thing, but that was an example of how I had to undo a culture, get uncomfortable, not go for what was easy to create the culture that I desired and that I knew was going to be best for us both, and make sure while I was doing that,
Mhm.
that I was approaching her as an equal partner in this.
Mm.
Even though I was the parent, even though I was redirecting her, I was redirecting as she was my partner. How can I partner with you to help make this transition easier? So that looked like her requesting that she listen to music while she was playing in her room. We don't do it anymore, but when she was younger, she needed something to keep her company. That
Yeah.
made sense. We tried different things because I was approaching her as a partner,
Yeah.
right? So for the example in the classroom where maybe you're realizing that you need to approach your students more as a partner, but in doing so, you're going to have to undo some harm that may have been caused. You're going to have to rebuild some trust.
Yeah.
You're going to see the pushback and the behavior before you see the reward, because their behavior is their way of communicating an unmet need.
Yes.
I hear you. I see that you have an unmet need. I didn't meet that need. And that's my job as your educator to make sure your needs are met. Tell me what I need to do. Okay. That's how you level that playing field, so to speak, and that hierarchy in your classroom without, so to speak, losing your position of, I don't want to say authority, but the trusted adult that that they're still supposed to trust and respect and understand that you are still the adult in the classroom, right? So I hope that that helps. Now I understand that there's other fill in the blanks, though. I get that, right?
Yeah.
That could be, it could be something that is a little bit more on the line with your job. I
Yeah.
and same thing, right? It's one of those situations where it's like I can't give a tangible response, like here's what you can specifically do in your classroom. But if I were in your shoes, I would be asking myself, well, what is in my control,
Yep.
right? What can I do? And if there's something that is outside of my control, like just say, for example, standardized testing, right?
Mm.
So in my book, I talk about the history of standardized testing. The history of standardized testing is actually rooted in eugenics,
Yep.
specifically racist eugenics, right? So understanding that and understanding why it was created, understanding that standardized tests are created with specific biases, how am I helping my students prepare for this with that lens? How am I, connecting with my students and meeting them where they are in an honest way that doesn't tell them that this test is their measure of worth or intelligence? Helps them
Mm.
understand that while this is something that we shouldn't have to do, we have to do it because there are things in life that we do have to do. And we
Mhm.
can either choose to conquer that thing, even if we don't agree with it, because we don't want it to win, right? We can look at it like a challenge. And we can do that
Mhm.
thing together while still
Mhm.
understanding that it's not the most important thing, and approach it that way. And then when you're practicing for these tests and you're doing those practice questions, how are you helping your students relate to that material, understanding the biases that are at play here, and being honest with them as much as you can in an age appropriate manner in that scenario, right?
Yeah.
That could be an example of something that you can do that's within your control, because at the end of the day, your administration wants the results, right? But maybe you don't get the results the way that they're suggesting you get them. Maybe you go at it in a decolonized way that ends up blowing everyone out the water. That's an example.
If I could jump in here, I hope that the disruptors listening are getting, the things that you're saying. I think about it when you're in the classroom, you have an opportunity to steward the perceived, believed, or even fabricated power that you have. You have an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to steward that.
Mm-hmm.
What you do with power in your classroom will either reinforce or show a better way for how students should be dealing with the same things, how they're conceptualizing these things. I remember when I used to go and bowl for the first time, first few times actually. Every time I would bowl, that thing went straight to the gutter. I don't care how hard I tried. I would try really hard to get it down and hit these pins. And sometimes I get a few on the right, but inevitably I was going to get somewhere near the gutter, if not in the gutter. But they had this wonderful invention called bumpers.
I know, those things are awesome.
They would blow these bumpers up and they'd put them in the gutter. And all they served as guardrails to get us to our destination.
Hmm.
They redirected us if we went too far to the right or if we went too far to the left, but they kept us on the path. They didn't stop us from moving, they showed us how to move. I think educators are given that opportunity.
Mm, yes.
So much of power and how we conceptualize power is that I need to meet force with force. In other words, to do that means I'm going to stop your movement. I'm going to
Mm,
stop where you're going
hmm.
versus let me steer you in a direction that's going to help you get to where you want to go.
Right.
Let me show you how to best get there. It was so prevalent in terms of just the bumpers that there was this little line on the bumpers, and we as kids started to learn that if we hit the bumper right there, it would go right to the pins we wanted and give us a strike more times than not.
I
I hope that
love that.
educators are hearing from you. Be a bumper.
Mm,
Help redirect. The thing though is, as a guardrail, you stand in the gap for others and you kind of lay your power down in some ways. You're
yeah.
not the authority. You're not the authoritarian. You're not the dictator in the classroom. No, but you help curate an experience that
Hmm.
invites people on a journey to get to their destination.
Right.
And I hope that our educators are hearing that from you because I think that's been really, really insightful.
Well, you put it in a much more just beautiful way. So to summarize my long-winded answer, be a bumper. That's much more eloquent and illustrative. But in all seriousness, yes, I absolutely 100%.
For folks who are uh, tapping in and this is their first time hearing you, being connected to your brilliance, where can folks get in touch with you? How can they support you? And where can they go get your book?
Well, you can connect with me on Instagram. That's my primary place I hang out, at Caroline J. Sumlin. My website, carolinejsumlin.com. Everything is Caroline J. Sumlin to make it really simple. Twitter at Caroline J. Sumlin. And to get more information about my book, you can click the book tab on my website or just go to carolinejsumlin.com/book. And all the information about what the book is about, how to pre-order, is right there. And we also have some pre-order bonuses right now as well. So if you order anytime between now and the day before release, which is July 25th, so July 24th would be the last day that you would be eligible for a pre-order bonus. You will get a book club discussion guide, a guided journal, and the free a free copy of the audiobook that will be narrated by me as well. So you'll get two of those things, and right now, whether you pre-order the book or not, you can also read the first 2 chapters for free. That's also available on my website. But if you pre-order, you'll also get the bonuses sent to you, minus the audiobook, because that won't be ready until release. That will be sent to you separately. But you'll also get the first 2 chapters to begin reading now, which is pretty cool. You just have to fill out a little form, put your little order number in there. It's right there on my website. Hit the little click and it'll get sent to you. And yeah, I think that's about it. That's where you can find me.
Awesome. I hope folks do tap into your work. We have been in community for some time now,
Mm-hmm.
and you are consistently one of the people that I go back to. You're insightful, you're thoughtful, you help me become a better thinker. So I appreciate your work, and I
Likewise.
appreciate what you're doing. And folks, my educators out there who are listening, please get this book, add it to your collection, put it on your summer reading list. And yeah, man, let's continue to disrupt, because our kids need it. Our world needs it.
So good. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to be here.
Any final thoughts before we close out? Anything to, as we're having this discussion to educators as the work that you do, any final thoughts?
No, I think one of the biggest things that I always feel the need to remind people is that you deserve your liberation. You deserve freedom. So much of our struggle with worthiness, bringing it back to that, is that we don't feel like we deserve it, and we do. You don't have to do anything to earn it. Just as you are, you deserve to love yourself. You deserve to find yourself so worthy. We all do. Your students do. And there's something we have to do to earn that. So I think that's something that kind of keeps coming back with most of the people that I interact with in my community, is this struggle with feeling like you even deserve that. And I struggle with it too. I really do. Even though something I teach on, I still struggle every single day with whether I deserve this or not. We all deserve it. And when you understand just how much we deserve to live and walk in liberation, it makes you that much more hungry to fight for it.
I can't think of a better way to end. So thank you.
Of course.